Did you happen to miss HHHunt's Technology Park community proposal meeting out south in elementary school and wonder what happened? We're going to cover that in this video. What is going on, party people? My name is Chris Elliott, local realtor, Wyndham resident, concerned citizen. In this video, what we're going to do is I'm going to give you a recap of what happened at the HHHunt Technology Park community proposal meeting at South End Elementary School on November 17th at 6 p.m. I literally just got back from this meeting, so I'm recording this with fresh notes in mind. This is going to be my opinion of what happened from my perspective, from where I stood my seat. I could already hear in the comment section, folks are going to say, hey, you got this wrong, or hey, they said this, but it's not true, or you're a data center sympathizer. Guys, if you don't like this video, you can make your own video or put it in the comments. I won't read it later. Let's get into it. All right, so let's just talk about the drama of this for a second, because that's the juicy part that everybody wants to know. So I left my house in Wyndham at about 5:40 because my wife made chicken loaf, which is meatloaf with chicken, really good. Besides the point. Anyway, going up Pouncey Track Road to get to South End Elementary School, man, there was a line of cars like I've never seen. The light at the intersection of Ashland and Pouncey Track, I think I sat waiting for that light 3 different like changes from red to green, which never happened. So there was a caravan. It looks like, you know, the Allied forces were marching on Berlin going to South End Elementary School, which was kind of like set the scene for like, hey, this is the community coming out to oppose this data center. So that was interesting. When we got there, in all fairness, HHHunt and their partners, South End Elementary was in charge of like setting up the auditorium or the gym, but about half the room ended up having the stand. I guess the back of the room was not able to hear the microphone, so they were yelling at the speaker to talk into the mic and to turn it up, and he was kind of at a loss of like, hey guys, I'm as loud as I can be right now. So that was kind of interesting. At various points throughout the presentation, there were people yelling stuff out, which was fun and kept it interesting. And then the questions and answer section was more or less just people stating their grievances, which would say have every right to do. I don't know how productive that part of the show was. It was entertaining nonetheless. All right, so they open up the meeting just basically rehashing how the approval process works, the multiple points of application that HHHunt would have to make to be able to push this through, kind of what they were asking for. So the comprehensive plan amendments that would change the land from suburban residential to what's called an employment center, the rezoning applications, the conditional use permits for the electrical substations and related facilities, the special exemption for the taller buildings, the security fences. They broke down kind of, or they wanted to include clarify what was and was not included in this request. And they wanted to address common concerns, i.e. water, noise, traffic, air quality, and visual impacts. What was also interesting too is they started the meeting basically talking about how they got there, you know, how in 2016 they basically attempted to build a 55 plus community. However, there was going to have to be a cut through road through Wyndham, which ultimately got shot down. And they were arguing this is now the highest and best use of this land. It felt a little bit like, hey guys, we tried to build a residential and you guys shot us down, so now here's what we're doing. That's my opinion with that. All right, so a couple things that are no longer included anymore, which I thought were, you know, substantial, was they previously proposed an on-site wastewater treatment plant, which is now no longer going to be the case. I'll get back to that one. And there is no longer an on-site power generation or nuclear facilities, which is also very interesting. All right, so the buffers for this they propose is 100 feet along the Chickahominy River, 150 feet from other property lines, and 200 feet along public roads. They mentioned that the closest Wyndham home is about 450 feet from any data center building. Keep in mind though, that is structure to structure, that is not boundary line to boundary line. From what I understood, the closest Hanover home was 480 feet from any building. Once again, I believe that's building to building. I don't think that's property line to property line. It was also very interesting. Dan Riker, general manager of the Dominion Club, shout out to Dan, got up during the comment and question section and basically said, hey guys, like, we're not residential, but we're an existing business here. We're tax-paying legitimate business, and there's no consideration being taken into account on how close you guys are going to be to us, which I thought was interesting. Okay, so let's talk about water. So in the proposal, they are seeking to drill 3 wells, which would have domestic uses, sinks, toilets, etc. They would also be filling 2 250-gallon fire protection tanks. Now, this would be one-time filling that they say they would be able to fill slowly, not all at once, which wouldn't put as much of a strain drain on the local well water. That's 500,000 gallons of water that they would be pulling from wells. Also, I thought was very important, they said the plan for cooling the servers in the data center is a closed loop system. So what they said was they would be trucking in the water for that closed system and then reusing that water. So they wouldn't be, pulling water from the Chickahominy or from wells in order to cool their services. All that water would be coming from outside. They said the data center domestic use, there's 3 wells for sinks, toilets, etc., would be approximately 10,500 gallons per day, which they compared that to that of what could be built on that land, which would be 40-ish single family homes could potentially use up to 14,000 gallons per day. I personally thought that was a reasonable argument of, hey guys, the alternative is we built residential here and that's going to use more water based on, I believe, Hanover's own kind of studies that they found. So 1 point to HHHunt and the data center folks. I thought that was a legitimate argument. So very, very interesting when it comes to wastewater. The original proposal's wastewater treatment plan has been dropped. Alternatively, the domestic wastewater sinks, restrooms, etc. would be handled via large drain fields on residential land. I don't know if I'm in love with that, but I guess that's how you get rid of wastewater on rural properties. All right, let's talk about power generators and air quality. The power for this would come from existing high voltage transmission lines, which I don't know, from folks that I've talked to, it seems like they're going to have to bring in some new transmission lines for as much power as this thing's going to need. But that power will be stepped down through 3 on-site substations. Developers responsible for paying for all of this infrastructure, not existing taxpayers, or at least they say. As far as generators go, the diesel backup generators, they've committed to tier 4 generators, which apparently is the most stringent EPA category on the market. It's basically the least polluting generator out there. I still think it's probably not great for air quality, but it's as good as it can get. They did reiterate that they're only for emergency backup during outages. However, they are allowed to run monthly testing about 10 to 30 minutes per generator, which just pollutes the air just as much as whether we're running in emergency circumstances. They did highlight the emissions are regulated by Virginia's DEQ department. They would be issuing air permit capping emissions and run hours. So basically that's going to be regulated by the state of Virginia. Let's talk about noise and lighting, 2 of the major concerns. So the county noise ordinance says that there can be max levels measured at the property line of neighboring parcels. They quoted roughly 52 decibels at night, 57 decibels per day at nearby properties. They compared that to a quiet dishwasher, which the speaker basically said he just bought a dishwasher and that was 50 decibels. I think what was lost and somebody brought up in the comment section is these would be running pretty much 24/7. So, that's still a concern. They did also highlight that for each building, they have to run a noise study, and that if measurements exceed the ordinance limits at the property lines, it's required to add mitigation, i.e. more walls, more buffers, until it complies. As far as the light goes, they mentioned that all fixtures must be fully shielded and downward facing. There are limits on mounting heights for light poles and property lights. They mentioned a max of a half-foot candle at the property line, which they compared to roughly like a hazy or the moon on a hazy evening light level, which I have no context for how much light that is or is not, but there's definitely going to be some light on this thing for security purposes. All right, let's talk about traffic. They mentioned that once completed in 2035, they estimate that it would bring in an additional 2,900 vehicle trips per day, spread across throughout the day, 3 different shifts. What wasn't talked about as much, I thought, was the amount of construction traffic that I think would be coming in over the next 10 years as this thing's being built out. They talked about modeled construction phase traffic for workers and trucks, but I think the reality is it's going to be a nightmare to see this thing built over the next 10 years. There's going to be a lot of traffic, from my humble opinion, with this thing being built over the next 10 years if it goes through. As far as visual impacts and what it's supposed to look like, they talked about different sight lines from many different areas, including within Wyndham. Basically, they said we're going to try to keep as much of the existing vegetative barriers as possible. There were some areas where there wasn't any current, vegetation. They were going to build, or they were going to plant 6-foot evergreens to kind of eventually grow up to hopefully shield 62-foot building, which I think is going to take a couple years for those to get to that size. Economic benefits they're claiming, they quoted they would be bringing in $8 to $10 million per year in tax revenue at full build out. They translated that to $400 per person in the South Anna district and $70 per person countywide in Hanover County, which then somebody yelled out, hey, I'll give you $70 to leave. And the crowd erupted in laughter. That was kind of an interesting moment in the evening. What's a little shocking thing is, at the end of the day, when this thing's fully built out, it would only bring in 40 full-time operational jobs. So not a ton of jobs long-term for this project. All right, so where do we go from here? So the next stop in this journey is the Planning Commission public hearing, and then it goes to the Board of Supervisors public hearing, which then leads into the final vote, from my understanding. So it was very interesting. My kind of recap on the whole situation, it's been very interesting. I've been looking this solely from the perspective of a Windham, Henrico County resident, and my friends that are all in Windham and Henrico residents did not think about this from the Hanover side. And I'll tell you, as much as folks in Windham and Henrico don't want this, for the most part, the only folks that don't like development more are them good old boys from Hanover. And let me tell you, they were mad, they were upset, and they came out to give their opinion. By and large, it was very, very interesting to see the resistance from the Hanover side, and I had to leave before they even got to the questions, concerns from Henrico residents. So it's gonna be very, very interesting to see where it goes from here. If there's anything that you have a question, concern on that we didn't cover, throw it in the comments. We're going to keep you guys posted with these videos. We've got an interview set up with one of the Windham Foundation Smart Development Task Force members, and we're going to try to get an interview with HHHunt if they will grant it. We hope to keep you informed with these videos. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you on the next one.